When you can no longer see through a window in your canvas, and when it leaks through cracks, you have two options. One is to have it replaced at a professional canvas repair shop. They are mostly good and you can do other things in the meantime. But that's not what you want to do, is it now? You need a strong sewing machine, a really strong one. One that will punch through the fabrics used on boats. One that will not squeak and scream and give off terrible sounds of breaking plastics and overheating electric circuits at the first contact with some thick fabric, but will tug along, stitch by stitch, to that reassuring muffled clickety-clack of precisely machined metal parts moving in perfect coordination. If you are rich, but still insist on watching videos like this one, yours will be a modern, industrial-grade designated canvas sewing machine with a service agreement. They are probably very nice. But if you are like me, poor, the machine that can do the job for you is likely to be what they call a vintage sewing machine. And with high statistical probability, it will be black, made of cast iron, and have the word Singer written on it in gold decals. You'll pick it up at a car boot sale or a thrift shop, or it's given to you by someone who thinks it's useless. If your machine needs repairing, you need other videos than this one, but assuming it's in good working order, you'll still do some routine maintenance before you set it to work. It takes about an hour if you do it right. There are small oil holes in the body. They'll be pointed out in the instructions manual, or they might have tiny decals with the word oil next to them. A drop or two of sewing machine oil in each one is enough. Then there is a knob, or a thumb screw, usually on the front of the machine, above the needle. This is a thread tensioning device, and we'll talk more about it in a minute, but you'll want to take this apart, paying attention to the order of assembly. I'll say that again. Pay close attention to the order of assembly. You clean it and make sure it operates smoothly. There are 2 or more discs that probably need some cleaning and polishing. This detail, this tensioning knob, which we'll get back to, is your main control for stitch quality, and you'll want to get to know it and care for it like a soldier would with his rifle. Underneath the presser foot, there are rows of jagged metal that move. When the machine turns, these are the ones that pull or convey the fabric along. They're called feed dogs, and they are invariably clogged up with lint. It looks disgusting, but it's really only very small fragments of fabric held together with grease. It needs to be removed in order for the feed dogs to feed like they should. Further down in the machinery, there is a rotating, or sometimes oscillating, case that holds the bobbin. Actually, sometimes a case that holds a case that holds the bobbin. Keep it clean, free of lint and loose threads. Now, you can and will spend many happy evenings cleaning and maintaining your vintage sewing machine, but for now, you'll round things up with some pressurized air and a stiff brush because you have a job to do. It's time to consult the instructions manual. It's a small, green-friendly booklet written and illustrated in the 1930s that will give you concise instructions along with lovely drawings on the basic operation of your machine. The manual tells you how to wind the bobbin, that is, taking thread from the upper spool, and winding it on the lower, smaller one. Now, if you do as you're told and handle the mechanical parts as you should, you'll soon be engaged in the soothing and very rewarding task of winding the bobbin on a vintage sewing machine. It's a wholesome experience for a lover of clever mechanics, and the people who own and care for these machines are always at their happiest when winding the bobbin. The machine will tell you when the bobbin is full, and you need to go back to the green booklet because it tells you how to install the bobbin in the bobbin case in the correct manner, having it spin in the right direction and with proper tension. Installing this wrong, it's what's called a showstopper. Nothing will work. Somewhere in the debris that surrounds your machine, there is a collection of needles. Take them out and throw them away and buy new ones. They are cheap. But if we pretend that you forgot to do so, and it's a Sunday during the Second World War, then you take out your grinding stone of choice and sharpen your needles with light strokes. This isn't a joke, and it's absolutely doable. The needle needs to be installed according to instructions. If it's installed facing the wrong way, it will not make one stitch. Every machine is threaded a little differently. It's all in the manual, but a typical order seems to be an initial small hook, and then the tensioning device with its newly cleaned tension discs, 2 arms, one that moves, one that doesn't. The lower of these sits at an angle that engages the vital spring in the thread tensioner. Then there are 1 or 2 more little guiding eyes that lead down to the final one, sometimes, but not always, screwed on to the very needle bar, indicating the correct way to install and thread the needle, which, by the way, you are now ready to do, a welcome exercise in mindfulness. Now pick up the bobbin thread in the time-honored fashion described in the green booklet, and you are ready to make your test runs and calibrate that upper thread tensioner for the material at hand. An educational and fun way to do this is to make a row of test runs next to each other, tightening the tension for each one after another, back and forth, with gradually tighter upper thread tension. If you do that, you'll end up with a sample chart of seams that you can study and learn from. The stitches on the top, the ones that you can see while sewing, they are usually fine. It's the underside you'll want to check. Your sample chart will begin with a few hopeless seams, upper thread tension being way too low, resulting in horrible loops with the bobbin thread running straight through them, like a railing made of rope, or in this case, thin thread. The bobbin thread can, and will, be effortlessly pulled out through the loops, and the loops will inevitably be pulled out through the vinyl and the canvas, and the stitches will be gone. This shape will gradually change with more tension, the loops tightening down to knots that hold the bobbin thread better, but in the case of your thick thread, twist it into a zigzagging shape until, with the correct tension, they pull it tight and leave a still somewhat zigzaggy but acceptable seam underneath the material. With your heavy material, the sweet spot is at full throttle, and the other scenario, thread tension being too tight, can be left for another time, because your machine is now ready for sewing. Now place your spray hood or cockpit enclosure inside up, that is, vinyl side up, and start ripping the outer of the 2 seams that hold the window in place. There is no shortcut, and don't be tempted to use a razor blade between the fabrics. Put on some light entertainment on the radio, and be thankful that you have a hobby to keep you busy. Next, take your seam ripper, turn it sharp side up, small plastic tip down against the canvas, and, in an operation that looks like a strange sea creature plowing a water surface, you rip the vinyl apart between the still existing seam and the holes left behind by the ripped one. Now add double-sided tape outside of where the outer seam used to be. This tape is only to hold the new window in place while sewing and will naturally not be left on the canvas when all is done. Because you are prudent and because you don't want your new window material to have anything to do with the old scratched up stuff, you add a protective layer made from the wrapping paper that came with a new vinyl. At some point, you decide that the old and wrinkly canvas is flat enough, and you attach your new window material to the tape, where it's kept in place ready to be sewn on. You roll up one side, the one that will pass through the sewing machine, and secure it with some spring clamps. This will help you considerably in a moment. You get reasonably comfortable and get ready to handle large pieces of canvas made for the great outdoors in the confined environment of a sewing table. You bury the needle in a good starting position, you make a few back stitches, and then you are on your merry way. You try and aim for a good turning spot in the old seam to make that sharp corner neatly. Roll up the next side of the material to go through the machine and carry on sewing. Your biggest problem now that you have correct thread tension and clean feed dogs is that big mass of canvas will not want to slide easily over your table, but will actually give the feed dogs a run for their money. You need to help push it along, which feels wrong because, ideally, you've learned the feed dogs should set the pace, but they need some help. You'll find a good balance, and when you've turned 4 corners and you reach your old footprints, you make a few more back stitches and you are ready for the next step, which is to take your canvas back to the ripping and taping station, rip the last of the old seams, this time from the canvas side, naturally, because there is new window material covering the seam on the other side. Again, you find your rhythm and rip your way along towards the very satisfying moment when the old window can be taken out completely, leaving the new one in place, which you can hardly see because it's transparent. There is one more run at the old machine before we are done, and the routine is the same. Bury the needle in a good spot, make your back stitches, take a deep breath, and off you are. Now, it is an old wrinkly canvas, and if you do sew in a few bumps here and there, you'll have to decide if it's forgivable or not. But if you make a proper ditch drive, then you have to back up, rip a few inches, and make a new start. There is no shame in a few back stitches along the way. As I said, it's an old canvas and you are in training. When your seam is done, you repeat that sea creature operation with a seam ripper to get rid of the taped edge of the new material, and you are done. You've replaced a window in canvas, and that is not a small thing. So be very pleased with yourself, and furthermore, you have a friend for the rest of your life in your lovely vintage machine.